Let me know. They have a sound system set up, but I think we're small enough, we should be fine. And I have a handout for you that if you want to download that, it has kind of a summary of what we talk about today and some of the steps that I'll tell you about. You may not want to be writing all that down. So you can find that on my website at triumphantlearning.com/HOK2021. Now, when we talk about obedience, this is actually one of those habits that if your children obey, you can homeschool more effectively with confidence and joy because you're not battling with them. So we worked on this really hard when my daughters were younger. They are now 13 and 16. And it was a hard journey. And there were many days that were really challenging to get them to obey, but it has really paid off. This is what our days sometimes look like. I would imagine you've had some of these too. Getting our children to obey often feels like a battle of wills. And you're not alone. Many parents struggle with this. I struggled with this. But whenever we can overcome this and help our children to obey, our days no longer look like that. So today we'll talk about how to help your children want to obey, how to identify and remove common barriers to obedience, and how to make it fun to learn to obey. Because when it's fun, it's a lot easier for all of us. You guys want to come on in? We have room. We have extra chairs. So I like to think about what are our motivations to obey. When we know why we're teaching our children to obey, and when we know why they want to obey, it's a lot easier for us. So there are 4 reasons that I want my children to obey. First of all, it keeps them safe. We're often in situations where I need them to listen for my voice, and I need them to respond quickly. When they were young, we played this game called Run to Mommy. Started out as my daughter was running towards me, and I would bend down, open my arms, and say, "Run to Mommy!" And she would run in, I would envelop her, give her a big hug, and tell her that she did a good job listening for my voice. Well, I was able to progress to where she was walking away from me, and I did that, and she would come to me. So then we were on a nature walk. We were with some friends, there was a group of kids. When there's a group of kids, you're not really sure if they're gonna listen to you. And the oldest ones were in kindergarten. And it went down to the babies and toddlers and everything in between. So this group of moms and I were walking. The kids had gone just around the corner. We knew we were in a safe place, so we would let them explore a little bit. It was time to leave. So I said, "Okay, hang on. Let's see if this works." So I cupped my hands and I yelled, "Run to Mommy!" I waited a couple seconds. And then these pack of kids came barreling around the corner. My daughter was in the lead with her arms outstretched. I was like, "Oh my gosh, it worked!" I am so proud. But I've used that so many times. And I then transitioned that. This is not a little kid's game. It sounds like a little kid's game. Now, your teens do not want you yelling, "Run to Mommy." But you can train them to listen for a whistle. So when we were with a different nature group, here in Oklahoma, we had kids ranging in age from about 13 down to the babies and toddlers. And we were a large enough group, we would get spread out enough that several of the moms had whistles. And we trained the kids, if you hear this whistle, you come running to the nearest adult. Because either there's a safety concern, the weather's bad, we need to leave, whatever it is, you find an adult. And it was really fun to watch them because we would practice this periodically. We didn't use the whistle every time, it wasn't necessary, but we made sure to use the whistle so that they were in that habit. And as we would blow the whistle, we would see the older ones and the ones who had been around for a while shepherding the others. "Hey, come on, that's the whistle, we gotta go." And the little ones are just, "Okay, well, let's go." And the older ones who were new were like, what whistle? And they'd explain, "We hear the whistle, we run to an adult." So you can keep your kids safe by helping them learn to obey. And it doesn't have to be just do this, don't do this. Another reason is that it lowers my stress. Have you noticed that when you are telling your children to do something and they're not doing it, you're getting geared up and you're just, you're uptight and you can't respond effectively. So when we can get our children to obey, when they listen to us, we can be calmer. I've asked many parents, what is your biggest obstacle to maintaining a calm atmosphere in your home? And they say, my kids won't listen to me. We can overcome that. It also creates better relationships. If you're not battling with your children, you have time to invest in them. You have time to invest in relationships. And it's setting them up for life. You are training them to obey others in authority over them. So you can lay that foundation now while they're young, and as they grow and mature, as they become teenagers and young adults, they're already used to obeying, but also you can train them whom to listen to. You shouldn't listen to everybody, and sometimes they have to make these decisions, but we can help them learn how to do this. But let's be honest, learning to obey is not fun. And we may think that our children actually don't want to obey because it doesn't come naturally and they don't like it. So I asked my girls when they were in 5th and 8th grades, okay, why do you want to obey? Most of our days were calm, usually they were obeying, so I thought it would be interesting to hear their perspective. And they gave me 3 reasons. First, they said the Bible tells us to. The Bible commands us to obey our parents. Specifically, they said, if you obey your parents, you'll live a better life. My daughters recognize that we have perspective that they don't have, and they need to listen to us so that we can help them through this journey. They also said, obeying keeps us safe. I had to chuckle at this one. She said, parents know what is safe, and if you listen to them, you won't die. Well, maybe not quite, but they're on the right track. There are natural consequences to our actions. And when we help our children learn this and internalize this, then they can avoid some of that pain. And the biggest motivator, the biggest reason that my children want to obey is that it gives them freedom and independence. Because I can trust them, we can go places I never would have dreamed of taking them. I have taken them to museums, to concerts. I've taken my 6-year-old on a job interview dinner when my husband was interviewing for a job, and she behaved beautifully. We have traveled all over the world. They were super excited the year that they actually both got to go to Chicago at the same time. Because before that, I was like, one of you at a time. I need to hold your hand, the buses are zooming by, they're not watching for you. And I don't know if you're going to listen to me and stay on this sidewalk. So, one got to go at a time. And then when my youngest was about 5, they had both finally demonstrated enough of the ability to listen that we've all got to go to Chicago with my husband. And we got to go to American Girl. And they were in heaven. So they see that as they listen, as they obey, they get to do a lot of stuff. So talk about this with your children early. Talk about it often. There are so many ways you can do this. When you are reading books, when you're watching movies, when you see people out in public that are behaving or not behaving, talk about it. I like to ask some questions and say, was that appropriate when we see something happen or we read about something? I'll say, what does that say about that person's character? What kind of reputation will they develop? And does that make you want to be their friend? As they're thinking about this, they can start thinking about their own behavior and their own actions. But there are some barriers to developing the habit of obedience. These are barriers I've seen in my own life and in talking to other parents. The first question is, who's in charge? You or your child? Ask yourself these questions. Does he obey on his own schedule or when you tell him to? Does he negotiate different terms under which to obey? And does he obey for someone else, but not for you? When he's asking these questions, when he's not obeying, he's asking these questions. And your answer, your response, is going to tell him who's in charge. I've answered yes to every one of those questions, and I bet many of you can answer yes to at least one of them. It is hard to continue to be in charge because It's a day in, day out battle. And we have to be consistent. So the first barrier is assuming your parental authority. And we can do that, first of all, by earning their respect. When my daughter was 2, I realized she wasn't listening to me. I would put her on the bed to change her diaper and she'd start rolling all over the place. I'd try to buckle her in the car seat and she'd go as stiff as a board. I mean, everything in our day was a battle. And yet, I saw her with my husband. He said, do it. She did it. And I thought, what's going on here? And I realized I had abdicated my authority to him. If he was home and she was misbehaving, I said, hey, come help me. She learned. What dad says goes. What mom says, I can go to dad and it'll be fine. So I had to assume my authority, and it was hard, and it was embarrassing. There was one time that we were with my parents at their church, and as we were leaving, I was trying to buckle her into her car seat, and she was screaming and yelling and as stiff as a board and making a scene. But I had to stand my ground, and I told her calmly but firmly, you are getting buckled into your car seat. And at one point, because everybody's leaving and watching us, my mom leans over, do you want me to take over? No, I have to do this. I have to be the one so that she will listen to me. And I could tell that my mom was not so happy with that response because the screaming didn't stop. But it did eventually. She calmed down, she got in her seat. Eventually, she started to listen to me. She started to obey. She's now a beautiful 13-year-old who is trying to employ these principles with other kids. And it's funny when my girls come by as I'm working on something like this. And she sees this picture and she cracks up laughing because this is her too. And she said, yeah, I didn't know where I was going, but it doesn't matter. I was in charge. I was pushing that stroller. Yeah, that one pretty much exemplifies your year. We also have to respect our children. We need to show them that they're not simply puppets that we are controlling. We want them to obey for the right reasons. We don't just want them to obey to make us look good. We want to make sure that what we're asking them to do is appropriate, that they're capable of it. There's a lot of times that we tell them to go do this and they can't. So we just have to keep that in mind. Respect is closely tied to relationships and trust. So as you build your relationship with your children, as you develop that, you will be building trust. You will be building respect. Now, how many of you have had this thought? I have a strong-willed child. I had that thought too, and then I learned about the terms. So the definition of strong-willed refers to someone who is stubborn or obstinate and wants their own way. But think about the term willpower. Willpower means the ability to control one's impulses and actions. If our children were truly strong-willed, they would have the willpower to do what is right. I learned about this from Charlotte Mason's original homeschooling series, and it revolutionized how I trained my children. I no longer had 2 strong-willed children. I had 2 weak-willed children. And it was my job, my responsibility to build up their strength of will so that they could obey. The first way that we do this is to change our perspective, change our mindset, so that we're not viewing this as a battle. I'm viewing this as a partnership. I want to help my children just like teaching them anything else, just like helping them learn to tie their shoes, teaching them a school subject. I'm not battling during those times. I'm trying to help them. So I want to set them up for success. We can do that by recognizing when they need help to obey. Sometimes I have to take my young child by the hand and lead them in obeying. Sometimes I have had to take a child from the dinner table to a different room so that they could hear me, they could focus on me and make the right choices. I had to recognize what was preventing them from obeying and help them past that. And I want to partner with my children. Even my older children sometimes need this help. Sometimes a task seems too overwhelming. I tell them, you need to do this. And I just they don't know where to start. If I can help them take that first step, help them to start the process of obeying, then they're more likely to obey. Have you ever taken your little child's head and turned it as they were walking? Because wherever the head goes is where the rest of them goes. And we do the same thing. If I want them to be cleaning up their toys, I can say, let's go clean up, and I'm helping them out. We also have to choose our battles, because your goal is not to win all of the battles. You're going to have, sometimes you don't want to not even fight those battles, because you want to build influence in their lives. You want them to be the 16-year-old who comes to you and says, hey, Mom, I've got a problem. I need help. So by deciding what was really important to me when they were young, I was able to choose, is this a battle I really want to fight? Or maybe not. And peer pressure is not just for our kids. I'm sure you've seen this happen. One of the biggest battles that parents have in getting their children to obey is that they're afraid of what others are going to say as they're training their children, because it is messy. We have to be afraid to not let them throw a tantrum. We were in a store when my daughter was 2, and we only had 2 items left to get. It was hot, we were both tired, and we walked past an end cap, and she sees something she had to have. She takes it off. Mommy, let's get this. No, we're not getting that today. And she throws a full-blown tantrum. I put the item back up. I try to pick her up as she goes limp as spaghetti, and I was 7 months pregnant. It was not a pretty sight, but I got her in the grocery cart, got her buckled in, and I am just hightailing it to get the last 2 items because she's screaming, every eye in the store is on us. And I had to remind myself, I'm doing the right thing, I've got to keep my resolve. I have to show her that I'm in charge and we're not getting that item. But sometimes we have to let go of other people's expectations so that we can do that. We also have to recognize that obedience looks different in different situations. What you expect for your children to do is different than what I expect for my children to do, because we have different children. We have different life circumstances. You may have times that you have different expectations of your children. When we had foster children, we had a preschool-age boy come into our home, and we didn't know what it was going to be like. We had no idea how he behaved to start with. So I told my daughters, your expectations, we expect the same thing of you. You need to live up to what you know we've taught you to do already. We're going to have different expectations of this one because we don't know what he needs. We have to train him and be patient as he learns the rules of our home. So it may be different for different children. When my mom had knee surgery, I told my daughters up front, when we were going to stay with her and help her, I expect something different from you. Normally, we let them say, hey, can I finish this up? Because I want to respect their need. If they come to me, I ask them to wait till I get to a stopping point. So I show them the same respect. But when I say, I need you to come help me clean up the kitchen, take out the trash, they can say, can I finish this up first? And if it's not an urgent request, we usually say, sure, come when you're finished. But during this time, I told them, you come the minute Nana or I call, because I don't know what we're going to face. I don't know what help she's going to need. And they did. But I had to tell them up front about those different expectations. And finally, extend grace. This is hard. Extend grace to yourself, to your children, to those around you. Recognize that you may have some days that you'll accomplish nothing else, and it's still a successful homeschool day. I distinctly remember days where I had to push all lessons out to a future day because that's all I did was deal with character training. And now that I have a 13 and 16-year-old, I'm reaping the benefits of that. We can get a lot done. They're actually home by themselves today because my husband's working. They took the dog for a walk. They're taking care of stuff at the house. I can trust them because they've shown that. We've worked on this up to this point. We have to be careful about what we view of other people too. because it's easy for us to judge. I am the first to admit that I see a child misbehaving and I'm like, oh my goodness, that parent's not doing their job. But I don't know those situations. I have to remind myself, maybe they have a new foster kid that just joined them. Maybe they have an illness in their family, a death that just happened. I don't know what those children are going through, and I don't know what those parents are doing to train the children. So I have to expect, I want them to show me grace. I need to show them grace too. And when you can, lend a helping hand. We were on a shuttle bus coming back from a hike in Yosemite, and sitting next to me were these two young boys. One was in elementary school and the other was about kindergarten. He had a ton of energy even after this hike, and I could tell that this shuttle bus ride was going to be a bit of a challenge for him. So we started having a conversation. We talked about the hike they'd been on, about how his home was different than our home, and just that, anything that I could find to talk about that would keep him occupied. And it was a way for me to show some grace to the mom. It was a way for me to give her a little bit of a break, because I'm sure she was tired too. So extend grace when you can. Now the fourth barrier is distractions, and it's getting worse and worse every day. We were about to take a 3-week trip to Maine when my daughters were 4 and 7. This is a picture from the trip. And I was thinking, okay, we love traveling. My girls travel well. We've never lived in town with family. There was one year that we had to travel 12 hours just to see family. So I wasn't really worried about the traveling. It was the 3-week part that I was a little concerned about. I was thinking, are we gonna like each other when we get back? We had the blast. We have taken many more 3 and 4-week trips, and it has been the best thing ever for relationship building and for habit training. Because I learned something very important. When everybody's in a small camper and you're with each other 24/7, any small infraction, any disobedience, any attitude is magnified tenfold. So we were able to nip those bad habits in the bud, those attitudes quickly. And I also learned that when my husband's there 24/7, it's a lot easier. If I get tired, he can take over. He's had a busy day, a difficult day driving, then I can take over. We were there together, and we were working as a team. So as a result of that, it reminded me that we have to slow down if we're in a season of intense habit training. You may need to pull back from some activities that you're in so that you can be home more, so that your children don't have the distraction of being out. You may need to lower your expectations. You may not have as clean of a house. You may not have as many meals that are bigger and much more extensive. You may need to keep it simple for a little while. And we have to reduce noise. There is noise all day around us. Our phones are dinging. We can get news and television and music 24/7. Anything you want. There's a nonstop stream of chatter. We have to train our children and ourselves to listen attentively because we're trained not to. Now this looks different for different ages. If you have a young child, you may need to remove that child from the situation so that they can be in a quiet environment where they can hear you, where they don't have the noise around, where they don't have people that they're trying to impress, that they can just focus on you. If you have older children, you may need to have them remove their headphones, put down a book, stop playing, get their attention. Be sure that you're in the same room. I had a bad habit for a while of telling my children to do something as I'm walking past them to a different room. My husband said they have no idea what you want them to do because all we heard was, okay, point taken. I would go to them or I would call them to me. I would get their eye contact. Sometimes if they were younger, I would get down on your level. Now I sometimes have to ask them to get down on my level because they're both taller than me. So just make sure that you've got that eye contact because when you have contact with them, you know that they are at least outwardly paying attention to you. And remember that it is not a matter of winning the battle. It's not even a matter of winning the war. It's about coming alongside your child and providing that guidance and accountability to build the habit of obedience. It's difficult. There are some days that you will be exhausted. There will be days that you accomplish nothing else, but it is so worth it as we develop this habit with our children. And so let's talk about how we actually do that. We're motivated now, we know why we want to do it, we've worked on those barriers so that we can effectively train our children. And there are 4 C's that help me remember how to make this fun, because I want my children involved. I want them to be a part of the process. I don't want them to be passive. And so that is to be clear in what I tell them, to use natural consequences, to allow my child to choose how to respond, and to be consistent. And so all of these are on the handout, because I'm going to give you a list of things here if you don't want to have to write those down. So the first thing that we want to do is clearly explain what we want our children to do. I touched on this. Have their attention. Make sure that they are in the same room with you, that you have eye contact. Say his name. Our smart devices are listening for us. Hey Siri, and Siri wakes up. Say your child's name to get their attention. Spice it up sometimes. I like to say, hey Kiddlywits, because that just kind of shocks them out of their reverie. Mom's doing something a little weird and different here. Set the expectations ahead of time of what you expect. When your child knows what to do, it's a lot easier to obey. Before we would go into a store, I would explain, there are breakable items in here. It's going to be a duck walk day. That meant hands in the pocket, hands clasped in front, or hands behind them in a duck walk. I didn't really like the duck walk one. One of my children does not like being compared to an animal. I haven't quite figured that out, but she did not like that one. But she found a way to comply so that her hands weren't touching things. She was just looking with her eyes, but she knew what to expect. The same is true for teens and adults. You like to know what to expect when you get into a situation. So even now, I tell my teenagers, this is where we're going. This is what's expected of you. This is what you might experience. I try to prepare them in any way possible for what I think they might encounter and for what's expected of them. And I think this is especially true for our teenagers because they are now moving into adult roles. And my daughter yesterday said, sometimes I really like growing up and being an adult, and sometimes I really don't. I looked at her and said, I agree, I feel the same way. But we can help them and ease this transition as we tell them what to expect. We need to pause before we speak. Have you noticed how often you just start spouting out what they need to do? Have you really thought about what you want them to do? Well, I had a time that I was so incredibly frustrated because my daughters were not listening to me. Every time I would tell them to do something, they would argue back with me. They would negotiate. They try to get something different. And I took a step back and said, what is going on here? Because this was not a new stage of obedience for us. They had been obeying. We suddenly, though, were having these struggles. I was talking with my husband about it, and he said, that's because you're waffling. You tell them to do something, and then you change your mind. And so if you're changing your mind, then they're thinking, well, we don't want to do that. Maybe we can convince her to do something else. And so I had to start pausing. They would ask for something, or I would want to tell them to do something, and I would literally pause. Sometimes I'd tell them, hang on, I need to think about this. So that I could gather my thoughts, assess the situation, and then say with confidence, no, this is the answer. And this was most commonly happening when they asked to do something. And so I had to stop and think, is it okay to do it? What's the context? And especially now as they're teenagers and they're asking for additional privileges or to move into a different area, like using the internet in different ways and stuff like that, that I have to stop and think, okay, what are the consequences of this? I need them to be growing and maturing. It takes a lot to think through that. So pause before you give them an answer. And give them one direction at a time. Even adults can only hold 3 to 5 items in their working memory at a time. So start with one with your young children. Younger ones think it's fun when we make this a game. Give them a task and say, come check back with me. Make it like a special operative mission. This is your task right now, and then come check back, and I'm going to give you your next task. You can work up and give them 2 or 3 at a time, but do it slowly because it takes them a while to build this skill. And make sure that you give detailed instructions. Kids do not do well with implied instructions. They need to know the specifics. They need to know exactly what to do. We had asked our daughter to bring the trash can back in one day, and at this point, she was 12, so you would think that she would think to check if the trash was empty, and she didn't. It was after the trash truck normally runs, so we didn't think about needing to give her that extra instruction. And a little bit later that day, we saw it drive by, and we thought, this is a problem. And then we went to check, and sure enough, the trash was still in the trash can. And we told her, okay, the next time we say that, we actually mean make sure the trash has run. And I'm finding myself now, I get back from a walk with the dog, and I've seen the trash truck go through the neighborhood, so I know that he's already run, but I think of that each time, and I'm like, I'm gonna double check. So I don't take the trash can in with it full. So make sure that whatever you want your children to do, tell them explicitly. If you have specific steps you want them to follow, if they need to do something specific and it's out of the ordinary, make sure they know what that is. And focus on natural consequences. There are positive and negative consequences to everything that we do. You can help your children learn this from an early age. If they obey, if they hold your hand when you're crossing a parking lot, if they don't throw a tantrum in the store, they get to go back. If they can't do that, they have to stay home. And many times I had to find a different time that I could go shopping because my daughters had lost the privilege of coming with me. And it's an inconvenience because I had to go at night or on the weekends. I couldn't just go when I wanted to go. I had to go when my husband was home. But by enforcing those natural consequences, they learned, I better obey or I don't get to go with mom. Sometimes we have to make sure that those natural consequences, those are strong enough that they want to obey. There was one summer that I told them to get out of the pool. They were both good swimmers at this point. They should have been able to listen and obey and do what I said. And instead, the selective hearing took over and they chose to not listen. I had to get into the pool, grab them by the hands, and take them out. And as we dried off, I said, we're not coming back for a while. I can't trust you. I can't trust you. I don't know if you'll be safe in the pool. You have to demonstrate to me in other aspects of our day that you can listen and that you will obey. And it was a hot, long summer because we couldn't go back to the pool. And they kept asking, Mommy, can we go back? No, I don't know if you can obey. Mommy, can we go back? Oh, yeah. Eventually we got to go back. And for years, if they had that slight glimmer in their eye that they may not want to listen to me, we were at the park, at the pool, wherever we were. All I had to say was, do you want to come back? They snapped to attention. They did what they were told, and they obeyed because they knew it was not going to be pretty if they didn't. As your child matures, they will experience consequences in different ways. When they have a new job, they may get a pay raise. They may have people under them. There's responsibilities and privileges associated with that. When they are 15, 16, they have the privilege of learning to drive and to drive a car. And with that comes the responsibility of driving safely and responsibly. So help them learn this concept early, that their actions have positive and negative consequences, and they will be responsible for those. If you want to learn more about this concept, the book Parenting with Love and Logic is really helpful. But you also need to follow through on the consequences. How often have you said, do this, and then you don't actually make them do it? It's so easy in our rushed state to not actually pay attention to what we're doing. So think about what you can do before you say it. If you're at the park and you have a child who has a propensity to throw mulch, if you say, if you throw mulch, we're leaving, be sure that you can leave. If not, make it something you can enforce. You could say, if you throw mulch, you're going to sit by me until you can calm down. Make sure that what you're going to tell them, you can follow through on, and then make sure to follow through on it. But you also don't have to state the consequence. You may have a child who would much prefer the consequence to stopping what she's doing. So there were times that I had to stop myself and remember, oh, no, just tell that one to just do it. Because there were many times she looked at me and she's like, okay, and kept going because the consequence was not painful enough for her. So balance that, but be sure if you give them a consequence that you can and will follow through on it. And I think that's one where it's really helpful for us to have accountability. Have your spouse help you, have a grandparent help you, your friends. If you have a habit of not following through, tell them, hey, keep an eye out and just let me know if I'm not doing that, or gently remind me, because there were times that I would get tired and lazy and I wouldn't follow through, and my husband would just look at the girls and say, your mom said to do something. And just that little bit of help from him helped all of us, help wake me up out of my reverie, help the girls remember, oh yes, we need to respect mom and we need to obey. And also, don't argue or negotiate. You are in charge. You are in control in your household, or you hopefully want to be. There have been many times that I have told children to do something and they said, I don't want to. There was one time that we were at a theme park with family, and there were a multitude of cousins and aunts and uncles, and we kind of split the groups up because they wanted to do different things. It was a hot day, we all had water bottles with us, and I told my group, take a drink. And one of them, who has a tendency to want to do her own thing, looked at me and said, I don't want to drink. I looked back and said, I don't care if you want to drink. I said, take a drink. And she knows I mean business. And so she dutifully took her drink, and we didn't have any more problems that day. I've used this many times. My children, with nieces and nephews. I have used it with teenage boys on mission trips. When they didn't want to follow the rules that were designed to keep them safe, they didn't want to follow the safety protocol. And I said, I don't care what you want to do. The rule is, and you need to do it. So when you set that expectation, they're more likely to listen and to obey. My girls, when I told them about that incident with the teenage boy on the mission trip, they said, well, how did you get him to do it? I said, I don't really know. I just said, this is not what's happening. This is what you're going to do. I think there's something about the way that you say it. Are you commanding their respect? Are you waffling like, well, you need to do that? Or are you telling them this is what you do? And as you do this with your children, they will learn this and they will start picking this up. My daughters are now working with younger children in that mentoring role as they're helping out with various church activities. And one time I was talking with my 13-year-old and she said, I don't know how I get them to do what they're doing. Because I had told her that was one of the things that made her a really good leader with where she was helping. And I said, it's because you go in and you tell them to do it and you just make them do it. She said, I don't know how I'm doing that. Doesn't really matter. I don't really know how you're doing that either, but you are commanding that respect. You were having that confidence to make it happen. Now, we also have to let our children choose. First of all, they're not puppets for us to control, but this is how they will build that strength of will. If you think about weight training, you are actively lifting that weight, and that is what's building that muscle. So when we allow them to make choices and we respect the choice that they make, then that is helping them to build their strength of will. We should start by talking with them about their motivations. Why are they obeying? And are they obeying with the right heart? This is really hard, especially for some of our children who tend to be the ones that we battle with the most because of their personality, I learned the concept from Parenting is Heart Work, that when our children obey outwardly, they do what we tell them to do, but we can tell on the inside that they don't want to obey, that is like a tomb. The outside is a whitewashed rock, and it looks nice, it looks pretty. The inside is dark and damp and decaying, and I don't want my children's heart to be like that. There have been times that, particularly with this one child, she would obey and she'd say, "Yes, ma'am." I'm like, okay, anything about this demeanor is telling me that you're not obeying for the right reason. You are shooting fire at me. I mean, there's disdain dripping off every word. And I explained this concept to her at a very neutral time, not whenever we were having a situation that we needed to deal with. But I explained this concept and said, I want your heart clean. I want you to obey for the right reasons. And I want you to be able to obey others when you get older so that you don't do what you just did to me, because that's not going to go well for you. You will lose your job, you will lose your friends, you will not have good relationships. So we had to work on that, and it took us a long time to get past that. And there are still days that you can tell she is just holding in the rage and trying really hard not to let it overcome her. But she's working on controlling her anger so that her heart is in the right place. Her heart is clean and it's not dark and decaying. Now this does look different. It's hard whenever you take this approach. It takes a little longer to get them to the place where they're obeying and obeying for the right reasons, because it's easier to just obey and then kind of check out. But if we want them to put in that effort, put in the work so that they are changing their heart status and that they are actually obeying because they want to, it'll take a little longer. But you can set a positive tone in your home. You can work together and you can make generational change. You can watch them developing the right heart attitude and employing that principle with others they're encountering and with their children in the future. We also need to allow our children to experience the consequences of their choices, which means that one, we have to follow through with what we say we're going to do, and two, not take it personally. When our children make bad choices, they're making bad choices. It's not a reflection of my character. It could be a reflection of the fact that I need to continue working on training them, but it's not a reflection of me. They have to choose their own way. There have been many times that we would be at a restaurant and I would pick up my child or a niece or a nephew from the table, literally remove them, take them to the lobby, because something as simple as, no, we're not ordering dessert tonight, would send them into a tailspin. It was too noisy, too loud, they couldn't focus, and so I took them to where it was quiet, they could focus. And I often would say, okay, you have two choices. You can choose to accept the answer that was given to you, and we can go back and join everybody else. Or you can choose to not accept that answer, keep throwing a fit, and we're going to go sit in the car. And we'll wait for everybody else, and it'll be just you and me. And you could see them think, and they're like, oh, I really want to go back, I really want that dessert. But they, almost every time they made the choice to go back, they chose to forego their own desires so that they could join the rest of the group. And as we walked back hand in hand, I was proud of the strength of will that they were building. And you could tell they were proud of the choice that they had made. They were being a big girl or a big boy, making the right decision. And also, don't overreact to their mistakes, because they will make them. But the way that you respond right now is going to set the stage for your future relationships. If you overreact right now, they may not come to you when they're teenagers and young adults and they have a really big problem. If, however, you continue to tell them, it's okay, you made a poor choice, I want you to not make that choice again. Let's talk about how you can make a better choice next time, but I still love you. It's okay that you've made this mistake, but let's learn from it. Then when they have a problem in the future, they'll come back to you and they will be able to talk to you. Now, this still won't be easy for them. I remember multiple times that my preteen and teenage daughters would come to me, and one of them would say, I haven't told you this for a while, but, and I talked with my camp counselor last summer, and she really said I should talk to you, but I was afraid. And okay, we've almost never overreacted when they've made mistakes. So even in that setting, it's hard for them. And what she told me was, I've been reading past bedtime. And I thought, oh. It's okay, honey, I did that too. Thank you for telling me. I know how much better you feel now. And she's the one that comes to me and she says, I know you told me to do this, but I didn't do this. Or whatever it is. Like, she confesses because she wants to get it off of her chest. And so she stops feeling bad about it. But because we've established this atmosphere where it's okay to talk to us, it's okay to make mistakes, then we can use that as a way to help them grow and mature. Now, we also need to be consistent. This is probably the hardest part of habit training, and especially training in the habit of obedience. The first thing we need to do is to work as a unified team, because children are masters at manipulating the situation. If mom says no, maybe dad will say yes. If dad says no, maybe a grandparent will say yes. Whatever the case is, if there's any variance in how you respond, they will know that, and they'll take advantage of it. So make sure that everyone who interacts with your children is working as a unified team. Use a consistent approach. Give them the same answers. Use the same strategies. And don't contradict each other in front of your children. If you have a disagreement about how something is handled, take it to a different room. There have been many times that I would go to my husband or he would come to me and we'd say, I don't think you handled that very well. This is what I would have done. And it can go both ways. Sometimes it's like, point taken, I need to change what I just did. I'll work on that next time. And at other times it's, but I did it because, and when we explain the reasons, the other one would say, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. They had information we didn't have. So sometimes having that difference is good, and sometimes it's a learning opportunity for us as the parent. But don't do it in front of your children. Talk at a different time where they see a unified front. They see everything happening the same, and even if you are going to disagree or change approach, that is happening out of their eyesight and earshot. The other benefit of working as a unified team is that you can hand over a situation when you have reached your limit. There have been many days that we'd be having dinner and one of the girls would say something or say it in a way that they shouldn't have been saying it, and I would just look at my husband like, this is what I've been dealing with all day. It's not going to be pretty if I keep responding. And he would take over. He could be calm because he had a fresh perspective. He wasn't the one who had been saying the same thing over and over. So you can give each other a break. You can back each other up. And say it once and follow through. If we tell our children to obey on the count of 3, they will obey at 2 and 9.99999 because they can and not get in trouble. If you tell your child to do something, they need to do it the first time that you tell them. One problem is that our children tune us out. And I think this is especially true when we are home with them all the time. So often I see them walk right past my husband to come to me, and I'm like, he was right there. The question is for him, not for me. And the thing is, I thought this was a mom-dad thing. No, this is the primary caregiver situation. I had a student in my course recently who the dad was the primary teacher and the primary caregiver. And he was describing the same thing, and I said, oh my gosh, it happens to you too. The issue is they tune us out. We become comfortable. We become what they're used to. And so sometimes what we tell them to do is not that they're trying to not obey, not that they don't want to obey. They didn't hear us. So all those strategies we talked about earlier, get rid of the distractions, have their attention, get in their line of sight, make sure they heard you. And if they heard you, follow through on it. And again, this is where that accountability is so helpful. There have been so many times I don't use the I'm going to count to 3 strategy, but I sometimes repeat myself because it's easy to fall back into those old habits, especially when we're preparing dinner, we're folding laundry, we're doing all these other things, and we tell them to do something, and then we forgot that we told them to do something. And sometimes I'll now say, did I say this out loud, or was I just thinking this, that I need you to go do this? Because I really don't know, with all the thoughts that were going through my mind of what I need to do, did I actually tell you to do this? Sometimes that's enough of a prompting that gets them to go do what they're supposed to do. But I have to be careful that I don't just repeat myself over and over. And it gets harder as they get older to make sure that they do it, because you can't take your teenager by the hand and lead them to go do something. It just doesn't go very well. So you have to change your strategies a little bit and say things like, I've asked you to do something. What is it you're supposed to do? Just to get them to focus, to get them to change their line of thought so they can go do it. I think it's also important that we tell them about changes. Some of our children especially have a hard time with change. We all have a little bit of a hard time with change, but some of them, it just throws them into a tailspin. And it can actually cause them to throw a tantrum because they're so just upset about what's happening. So when we can tell them what's coming, when we can tell them about those expectations ahead of time, they can prepare themselves. One of my daughters especially does not do well with change. And when she was a little girl, if I found out about something happening that evening that was going to be different than what we expected, I would tell her the minute I found out. And I have one friend that I was telling about this, and she said, oh, I don't tell them until right before because I don't want to deal with it. I'm like, yeah, well, it's not so pretty if I do that. But I explained what was going on and the thought process that she went through, and I said, if I can give her that entire day to change her expectation of what's going to happen, then she can deal with it. And my friend said, oh, I hadn't thought about it that way. So especially if you have a child who's resistant to change, if you have a child with special needs, make sure that you give them plenty of notice. Now, it can be fun to learn to obey. We've talked about some of the games that we've used. If you think about some of the situations that you've been in where you had a really good leader, where it was fun to be a part of the organization or the team, they probably were not dictators. They didn't tell you, go do this. They weren't barking out orders. They were encouraging, they were inspiring, they were equipping you. And it's my job to be that influential leader. It's my job to not bark out orders and to just start telling them what to do, because that's no fun. It's easy to do, and especially when we get into the hustle and bustle of everything that we have to accomplish in a day. But if we can make it fun to be a part of the family team, they want to help and they want to obey. We used games like the Run to Mommy game. We'd play Listen for My Voice. We would role play different situations. You can also use strategies like encouraging autonomy, giving them a choice. Do you want to put your shoes on first, or do you want to pick your books up first? They both have to get done. They don't realize this, but they get to choose which one, which makes them want to participate. We use timers extensively. Sometimes they can be motivators. Sometimes they can be, okay, we're going to get this room cleaned up in 10 minutes. Who's going to get done first? Sometimes it's, you can play for 5 more minutes and then we have to go. Having the actual timer set keeps all of us accountable. You have a few examples in the download. One that's not in there is about having a yes marathon. This is not really about creating the habit of obedience, but it's about creating that relationship. Because when you have that atmosphere and relationship that it's fun to be there, then you can encourage more cooperation. But what would happen is we would realize that my daughters had asked, multiple questions that my response was yes. So then I'd kind of look at them like, okay, bring them on. And they'd go, oh yeah. And they'd ask me as many questions in a row as possible, to which I answered yes. And I'd be like, yes, yes, yes. And it just created a fun atmosphere for us. Now there are other games that you can play too, and I want to let you know that this workshop is available on my website, but in addition to the actual workshop, which will be a good reminder, there are some extra tools. There's the obedience phrases that you can use to reduce those obedience struggles. There's an obedience toolkit with prompts and suggestions to help you remove the barriers, to improve your consistency, to help you spice things up, to make it fun to learn how to obey. There's 17 games. We talked about a couple of them, but there's 17 total games that you can use to train your children to listen attentively, to follow directions, to respond quickly and respectfully. There's book suggestions that you can read with your children, your older children can read, that you can read to continue improving your skills. And there's a PDF about starting this process with older children, because our older children require a different approach. But I want to end by reminding you to enjoy this process. It is hard when we are in the midst of habit training, when we are in the midst of building a habit of helping our children. But I like to remember this advice from Gretchen Rubin, that the days are long, but the years are short. There were so many days that I fell into bed exhausted. I still fall into bed exhausted sometimes, but that's because my teens want to talk late at night. Not because they've worn me out all day. But because I have this perspective now of only a couple of years left with one of my daughters in my home, that I can remember, it's all worth it. It was hard, but it's all worth it. And I remember the days getting so frustrated when there would be an older lady at church come up and tell me, oh, they're so cute, enjoy this time. And I'm like, you're not in my household. But when I heard this advice, it changed my perspective. It allows us to acknowledge there are difficult days. There are days that seem like they will never end. But yet, the time we have with our children is so short. I look back now and I see the progress that my kids have made. I had the strong-willed 2-year-old, the disobedient or delayed obedience of a 6-year-old. And we worked through these challenges. And today I have beautiful young ladies who are mostly obedient and who are trying to employ these strategies with younger kids that they are encountering, with their cousins, with kids at church. And they're asking me questions like, now, I remember you did something, and why did you do that? Because I want to make sure I remember this when I have kids. And I'm thinking, oh, you are way ahead of me. But they see the benefit. But you can do this. Remember that you need to work together as a team, and that you can make it fun to learn to obey. So I don't know if we have a few minutes, I think. If you guys have questions, we can do that, or they may be ready for lunch. Thank you for coming, and have a good day the rest of the afternoon.